"I have nowhere to sleep tonight," the girl said from the doorway of the vestry, and 11 trustees of the Marchbourne Almshouse Charity turned round in their chairs, as though she had thrown a stone through the window. The Duke of Marchbourne, who had been chairing the meeting for 40 minutes and had not yet been given one honest figure, put down his pen and said, "Then somebody in this room is going to explain to me why not." The rain was coming off the roof of Cawbury Church in ropes. She stood in it, half in and half out of the door, soaked to the shoulders, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth against her chest the way a person holds the only thing she owns. Alderman Gubbins recovered first. "Your Grace, this is most irregular. This young woman applied at the wicket this morning, and her application was considered and refused, and she has no business." "Refused on what ground?" "Settlement, Your Grace." The Reverend Mr. Sneed said it with the small satisfaction of a man producing a trump. "She is not settled in this parish. She was born at 40 miles off, and has resided here but 2 years and 8 months, and by the deed of the trust the almshouse beds are for the settled poor of Cawbury, and if we begin admitting strangers we shall be overrun." "12 beds," said the Duke. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. The almshouse has 12 beds. I walked through it in September. 4 were occupied." He looked down the table. "You are telling me that you refused a bed to a woman standing in the rain because she was born 40 miles away, and that you did so while 8 beds stood empty under a roof my grandfather paid for." Mrs. Peveril, who was the vicar's wife and the only trustee who had never once been contradicted, said in a voice of great gentleness, "Your Grace does not know the case. There are questions about the young person's character." "What questions?" "She was in a house of a certain kind." "Say what you mean, madam." Mrs. Peveril's chin came up. "She was 2 years in the household of the late Miss Bardolph, who kept the charity school at Nether Cawbury, and Miss Bardolph died in September, and the nephew who inherited turned the girl out of doors last Thursday. A respectable young woman does not find herself in the street on a Thursday." "A respectable young woman," said the girl in the doorway, "finds herself wherever the man with the freehold puts her. I had no lease. I had 11 shillings in my box, and the box is now with the carrier at 2 because I could not pay to have it brought on." Every head turned again. She was, the Duke registered, entirely calm, which was more disconcerting than tears would have been. Perhaps 23. A narrow face, wet dark hair flattened under a bonnet that had given up, and a voice that pronounced its words properly, not genteelly, but properly, the way a person speaks who has spent years teaching other people to speak. "Your name," he said. "Hesper Lane, Your Grace." "Miss Lane, what did you do in Miss Bardolph's household?" "I taught the lower school, 29 girls, reading, writing, plain sewing, and the 4 rules. I kept the school's accounts for the last 14 months because Miss Bardolph's eyes failed." A pause. "I also carried her upstairs at the end, when the woman who was paid to do it did not come." "Have you a character from her?" "She died on a Tuesday morning, Your Grace, and she had meant to write one, and she did not, and I have learned this week what a piece of paper is worth." Her hands tightened on the oilcloth bundle. "I did not come here to argue. I came because the door was open, and there is nothing else open in Cawbury after 5 o'clock, and I would rather be told no by 11 men to my face than by a wicket." The vestry was very quiet. Somebody's chair creaked. The Duke of Marchbourne stood up. "The meeting is adjourned," he said, "to the 2nd of January, when every trustee will bring the whole of the charity's accounts for the last 7 years, including the bread contracts, including the coal, and including whatever it is that appears in the ledger as necessary disbursements, of which there were £311 last year in a charity with 4 inmates. Good evening. He picked up his hat and walked the length of the vestry to the door, and stopped in front of Hesper Lane, and here he ran into the difficulty that was to govern the whole of that winter. He was Elias Warrender, 7th Duke of Marchbourne, 38 years old, unmarried, with a house of 200 rooms 9 miles up the valley, and stables warmer than most cottages in the county. He could have solved her difficulty in 90 seconds. And he could not do it, because a duke who takes a young, unprotected woman into his carriage at night and drives her to his own house has not saved her. He has finished her. There would not be a kitchen in England that would have her afterwards, and every one of the 11 people behind him would have said so at breakfast. And they would have been, in the terms of the world they all lived in, entirely right. So he did it slowly, and in public and out loud. "Mr. Sneed," he said, without turning round, "you will oblige me by coming to the door and standing where you can see and hear everything that passes. Your Grace, you have expressed a concern for this young woman's character. I am about to become the chief danger to it, so you may as well be useful and stand witness." The curate came, pink and reluctant. "Mrs. Peveril, you also. Thank you. Miss Lane, listen to me carefully. My carriage is at the lich gate. I am not going to put you in it." Something flickered across her face, not surprise, recognition. She had understood the arithmetic before he had finished stating it. "No, Your Grace. That would be kind of you, and it would ruin me." "Just so. Instead, my coachman will drive you 200 yards down the street to the Bell, where you will ask for Mrs. Truby, and you will tell her that the Duke of Marchbourne requests, as a personal favor, that she give you her own back bedroom, not a public room, her own, and sit with you at supper, and that the reckoning is to be sent to my steward. You will be in the house of a respectable married woman, engaged by me at 3 shillings the night as your companion, and Mr. Sneed here has heard every word of it, and will be able to say so on Sunday to anybody who asks. Is that acceptable to you?" Hesper Lane looked at him for rather a long moment. "You have done this before," she said. "No, I have thought about it for the last 4 minutes while Mr. Gubbins talked about settlement." He put on his hat. "Tomorrow at 11, Mrs. Truby will bring you to Marchbourne. She will bring you. You will not come alone, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Ryle, will interview you for a situation. I make you no promise of it. Mrs. Ryle engages her own people, and I do not overrule her, which is the only reason my house runs at all. But she has been asking me since Lady Day for somebody who can write a fair hand and keep a column straight, and I have a notion she will be glad of you." "Your Grace," her voice did something for the first time. "Why?" "Because there are 8 empty beds," said the Duke of Marchbourne, "and I have just discovered that I have been a trustee of that charity for 11 years, and have never once read the minute book. Good night, Miss Lane." He went out into the rain, and stood at the lich gate longer than he needed to, watching his own carriage travel 200 yards very slowly with a lantern at each corner, so that half of Cawbury could see exactly where it went and exactly who got out of it. Mrs. Ryle engaged her the next day at £14 the year, with a room at the end of the still-room passage. The Duke knew this because Mrs. Ryle came to the library to tell him so, standing in the middle of the carpet with her hands folded, and the expression of a woman who intends to say something disobliging to her employer and be thanked for it. "I have taken her, Your Grace, and I'll tell you plain why. Not for pity. She read me my own linen inventory back to me and found 9 pairs of sheets that have been going out of this house since the year 22, and she found them in 11 minutes. A grim satisfaction. And she asked for one thing beyond her wages. which was a key to her own door, in her own hand, and no duplicate kept in the housekeeper's room. Mrs. Ryle's mouth flattened. I gave it her. I'd have thought less of her if she hadn't asked. So should I, said the Duke. There'll be talk, your grace. There is already talk. Mrs. Peveril had it about the parish before the rain stopped. He turned a page he was not reading. Mrs. Ryle, I want a rule in this house, and I want you to enforce it against me before anybody else. Miss Lane is not to be alone with me in a shut room, ever. If I send for her, you come, or your Susan comes, or the door stands open on the hall where the footman is. I do not care if it is inconvenient. I do not care if it makes me look absurd. Mrs. Ryle looked at him for a while. Very good, your grace, she said. And might I say it don't make you look absurd. That was the 29th of November. By the 4th of December, there was a ballad about it in the Cawberry tap-room, and by the 11th, Mrs. Peveril had declined to be at home to the Duke of Marchbourne's aunt, and by the new year the whole affair had grown into the kind of story that a market town lives on for a generation, none of which was of the smallest consequence, beside what Hesper Lane found in the almshouse minute book on the 19th of December. The talk, however, had to be lived through first, and it was worse than he had expected, because it was not aimed at him. Nothing in England is aimed at a duke. He learned that in the first fortnight of December with a completeness that shamed him. At the Marl bench, he was rallied about his charity and laughed at agreeably, and given the best chair. In Cawberry, meanwhile, a woman crossing the market on an errand was hissed at from a doorway by two respectable persons who would have curtsied to the ground if he had been 3 yards behind her. He only discovered it because the under-groom's boy told the head groom, who told Mrs. Ryle, who came to the library and stood on the carpet with her hands folded. She's been going the long way round by the mill for 4 days, your grace. Adds 1.5 miles each road. She'd not have told you. The Duke of Marchbourne put down his pen. Send for her if she will come. She came, with Mrs. Ryle behind her and the hall door standing open on the footman, and she was perfectly composed, and she said before he could begin, I should like to give notice. On what ground? On the ground that I am costing you a great deal more than £14 a year. Her chin was steady. Mrs. Peveril has refused to receive Lady Ordish. There is a song in the bell with 4 verses. Your Grace's name is being coupled in a market town with a schoolmistress who came to your door in the rain, and there is not one thing in it that is true, and it will not matter in the least that it is not true. I have taught 29 girls. I know exactly how long a thing like this lasts in a place this size, and it lasts forever. And where would you go? A pause, too. There is a woman there who keeps a dame school and might want a hand at £8. £8, said the Duke, and your box is still with the carrier. Yes. He got up and walked to the fire and stood with his back to it, because he did not entirely trust himself. Miss Lane, I am going to say 3 things, and then you may decide. First, if you resign, they win, and the song has a 5th verse in which you are driven out, and they will sing that one for a generation. Second, I have no right whatever to keep you, and if you say the word tonight my steward will pay you a 12-month's wages, and Mrs. Ryle will write you a character, and my own carriage will take you to 2 in the morning with your box fetched at my charge, and I shall never once suggest that you owed me otherwise. And third, your grace. Third, he turned round. There are 3 deal boxes coming up from Cawberry vestry on Thursday, and I cannot read them, not truthfully. I have looked at that minute book twice this week, and my eye slides off it like water off a slate, because I have been a trustee for 11 years, and I am afraid of what is in it, and I want somebody in this house who is not afraid of paper. You are the only person I have ever met who is not. He let that sit. "That is not a kindness to you, and I will not dress it as one. It is a thing I want. If you stay because I need it done, and you will be paid for the doing of it, and I will hear no more about what you cost me." Hesper Lane looked at him for a long moment. Then, very slightly, her shoulders came down. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday, and Miss Lane go by the market, not the mill. If anybody hisses at you in the market, my aunt will be in Cawbury on the 2nd of January in a sable pelisse, and she has been waiting 15 years for a reason." He had given her the charities papers, because he could think of no gentler way to give a proud woman the run of his library. They came up from Cawbury in 3-deal boxes, minute books from the year 11, bread contracts, coal bills, the original deed of the trust engrossed on vellum in 1749, and a great quantity of loose paper that nobody had sorted since the Reverend Mr. Sneed's predecessor died. The Duke had them carried into the small east room, which had 2 doors and no lock on either, and told her to take as long as she liked, and to send for anything she wanted. "What am I looking for, your grace?" £311 of necessary disbursements," he said, "and whatever the reason is that 8 beds stand empty in a town with a workhouse full." She came to him on the 19th, with the 1749 deed in her hands, and Mrs. Ryle 2 paces behind her, because that was now simply how things were done at Marchbourne. "You are not a trustee of an almshouse for the settled poor of Cawbury," Hesper Lane said. "Read the 5th clause." He read it again. The deed of 1749 endowed 12 beds for the aged, the sick, and the destitute of the parish of Cawbury, and of the several villages lying within 6 miles of the church of Cawbury, without distinction of settlement, the said charity being founded in memory of a woman who had died on the road. 6 miles, he said. "Nether Cawbury is 2. 2 is 40, and I have no claim, and I never said I had." She set the vellum down. "But the 4 women in that house are the 4 widows of Cawbury tradesmen, your grace, and there are 21 people within 6 miles of that church who were refused on settlement in the last 5 years, and 11 of them are named in the minute book, and 4 of those 11 are down in the burial register within a 12-month of being refused." The Duke of Marchbourne sat back very slowly. "The word settlement," Hesper said, "was written into the standing orders in the year 14, by a resolution proposed by Alderman Gubbins and seconded by the Reverend Mr. Sneed's predecessor, at a meeting at which the chairman was absent." "Who was the chairman in the year 14? "Your Grace's father." "And where was he?" "In London at the Lords." Her eyes did not leave his. "It is in the minute. The noble chairman's regrets being received, the meeting proceeded." There was a long silence in the small east room. Mrs. Ryle, by the door, was staring at the carpet, with an expression that suggested she had known most of this for 20 years, without knowing that she knew it. "Go on," the Duke said. "You have not come to the money yet." "No." She opened the 2nd book. 12 beds endowed, 4 inmates. The charity's income is £460 a year from the Ridge Farm rents and the Cawbury Mill lease, and it costs 140 to keep 4 women. That leaves 320, and a charity may not accumulate. The deed requires the surplus to be laid out in bread, coal, and fuel for the poor of the 6-mile bound. She turned the page round for him. "Here is the bread. £209 last year, paid to Bartle and Son, bakers of Cawbury, at 11 pence the 4-pound loaf." "What is bread in Cawbury?" 7 pence halfpenny, 8 pence in a bad month, a beat. Mr. Bartle married Alderman Gubbins's sister in the year 13. The Duke got up and went to the window, and stood there with his hands behind his back for some while. And the coal? The coal was never delivered at all, your grace. There are receipts, and they are signed by the same hand as the bread receipts, and it is not Mr. Bartle's hand, because Mr. Bartle's hand is on his own bills to your steward, and it is a very poor one. Her voice was completely steady, and he understood that she had had a fortnight to be furious in private. Somebody in that vestry has been writing both sides of the paper for 11 years. He turned round. Miss Lane, when the 2nd of January comes, I can put all this before the trustees myself, and it will be a duke accusing a bakery, and Mr. Gubbins will resign for reasons of health, and the thing will be buried in the parish for the sake of everybody's Sunday. Or you can put it, every figure in your own words, standing up in that room in front of the people who told you to go and sleep in the rain. He watched her. It would cost you. They would say you were paid for it. They would say worse. They say worse now. Yes, said the Duke of Marchbourne. They do, and I have no way to stop them, and it is the one thing in this whole business that I cannot mend, and I want you to know that I know it. Hesper Lane closed the minute book. I should like to put it, she said. They worked at it through Christmas, in a room with 2 open doors, and Mrs. Ryles, Susan, darning by the fire. And the Duke discovered a number of things he had not intended to discover. He discovered that she read Latin badly and Greek not at all, and was ferocious about arithmetic, that she could total a column of 40 figures faster than his steward, and did it twice on principle, that she had a temper, which came out only against paper and never against people, and that she had taught 9 and 20 girls in a room with 1 window, because Miss Bardolph had believed, eccentrically, that a girl who could read a bill could not be cheated by a shopkeeper. He discovered that she did not know how to be thanked. The first time he said, simply, that he was grateful to her, she looked at the floor and said, "It is what I am paid for, your grace," and he thought about that answer for 2 days. And on the 27th of December, when the snow came down thick, and the road to Caubery closed, and the whole house went quiet, he discovered that he had been standing at a window for a quarter of an hour watching a woman in a plain dark gown cross the stable yard with a lantern, taking soup to a groom's mother in the end cottage on her own half-day, and that he had entirely stopped thinking about the almshouse. He went into the library, shut the door, and sat down with his hands flat on the desk. He was 38. He had refused, in 15 years, every arrangement his aunt had proposed to him, on the grounds which he had always given honestly, that he could not see the point of marrying a woman whose conversation he had already exhausted at the second dinner. He had a housemaid's daughter's inventory of 9 missing pairs of sheets in his drawer, and a copy of a 1749 deed on his desk, and he was not a boy, and he knew perfectly well what this was. And he could not say 1 word of it, not one, not while she slept in a room at the end of the still-room passage with a key he had given her, and drew £14 a year from his steward, and had come to his door in the rain with 11 shillings and no character. There is no honest way for a man to ask that question of a woman who cannot afford to say no. His aunt arrived on the 2nd of January in a hired sleigh, having been turned back twice by drifts, and took 1 look at him across the breakfast table. "You are in love with the schoolmistress," said Lady Ordish. "Aunt, don't. I have known you since you were 4 hours old, and you have exactly 1 face for a horse you mean to buy." She helped herself to a great deal of butter. "Mrs. Peveril has written to me, twice." The second letter contained the word unhappily 9 times, which is a great many even for her. "Elias, what do you mean to do?" "Nothing," said the Duke of Marchbourne. "Nothing. Nothing whatever, until she is not in my employment and not dependent on me for her bread." which means she must first have something of her own, and a character in writing, and somewhere to go that is not this house. And then, if she is willing to hear it, I shall ask her, and she will be free to laugh at me." Lady Ordish set down the butter knife. "I take it back," she said. "You have not got your father's face at all. Where is the meeting?" "The vestry at 11. "Then I shall come," said his aunt, "and I shall wear the sable, and I shall sit at the front where Mrs. Peveril can see me, and I shall not say one single word, which will be very much worse for her." The vestry at Cawbury held on the 2nd of January considerably more people than had any right to be there. The 11 trustees, the Duke's steward, Lady Ordish in sable, silent as a monument, Mr. Bartle the baker, who had not been invited and had been fetched, 2 overseers of the poor, Mrs. Peveril in her best bonnet, and at the end of the table with 3 deal boxes at her feet, and a fair copy of every figure in her own hand, a young woman in a plain dark gown who had been told, 5 weeks earlier at that same door, that there was no bed for her in a house with 8 empty ones. "Your Grace," said Alderman Gubbins, "I must protest at the presence of a servant." "Miss Lane is not here as a servant," said the Duke of Marchbourne. "She is here because she is the only person in this room who has read the deed. Miss Lane, begin at 1749. She began at 1749, and she spoke for 50 minutes, and she did not once raise her voice. She read the 5th clause aloud twice, and then handed the vellum down the table so that every trustee had to hold it. She read the resolution of the year 14, and the name of the man who proposed it, who was sitting 4 feet away. She read the list of 21 refusals with the dates, and then the 4 names that appeared in the burial register within the year. And when she came to the 4th, a bedridden woman of 71 at Hobbs Cross, 1 mile and 3 furlongs from Cawbury Church, refused in the January and buried in the March. The Reverend Mr. Sneed put his hand over his mouth. Then she came to the bread. £209, 4 shillings, paid to Bartle and Son for the year ending Michaelmas last, at 11 the 4-pound loaf. The assize price posted on the market cross in Cawbury did not exceed 8 halfpenny in any week of that year. I have the market clerk's book, which he lent me on Tuesday. She laid it open. The difference is £61 and some shillings. In 11 years it is upward of £500. "That is the price I was given," said Mr. Bartle the baker, who had gone the color of dough. "That is the price I was told to bill, and I never saw a penny above my own trade rate, and there's a man in this room who will tell you so if he's got any Christianity in him at all." Alderman Gubbins said nothing whatever. "And the coal," Hesper Lane said. 61 chaldrons over 7 years, receipted and signed. I have shown the receipts to the wharfinger at Marl, who keeps a delivery book because the excise requires it. There is no record of 1 chaldron going to the Cawbury almshouse in 7 years. She set down the last paper. The signatures on the coal receipts and the signatures on the bread receipts were made by the same hand. It is not Mr. Bartle's. It is the hand that has written this minute book since the year 12. Every eye in the vestry went slowly to the clerk of the trustees. The clerk of the trustees was Alderman Gubbins. It did not end in shouting. The Duke of Marchbourne had feared shouting and had prepared for it, and instead the room went entirely still, and Mrs. Peveril said, in a small voice quite unlike her own, "The coal was never delivered. To the old women, in the winters." "No, madam," said Hesper Lane. Mrs. Peveril looked at the table for a long moment. Then she stood up and turned to the Duke and said, "Your Grace, I resign my trusteeship, and I shall write it out, and I should be glad if the reason were entered in the minute in full, in my own words, so that it cannot be softened afterwards. I have sat in this room for 9 years, and I have voted whatever Mr. Gubbins told me the deed required, because I never troubled to read it, and I told this young woman 5 weeks ago that a respectable person does not find herself in the street. Her voice cracked, and she went on anyway. I should like it minuted that she has more understanding of the deed than the whole of us together, and that I said what I said, and that I was wrong. She sat down. Lady Ordish in sable said not one single word, exactly as promised, and it was very much worse for everybody. By 4 o'clock, the trustees had resolved the following: that the standing order of the year 14 was ultra vires and void, that the 6-mile bound was restored, that the 8 vacant beds be filled from the list of refusals and their surviving families before Lady Day, that the accounts of the last 11 years be laid before the Charity Commissioners with a full statement, and that Alderman Gubbins be removed as clerk and required to account. He accounted, eventually, for £470, which came out of the sale of 2 houses in Bridge Street and his wife's carriage. The criminal side of the matter took until the summer, and he was not an alderman by then, and he was not much of anything by the autumn. The Reverend Mr. Sneed asked to be moved to a curacy in Northumberland, and got one. Mr. Bartle, who had told the truth in the vestry when he might have kept quiet, remained the baker of Cawbury, and had, thereafter, the almshouse contract at 8d., which he never once exceeded. And on the last resolution of that long afternoon, the Duke of Marchbourne did the thing that nobody in the room expected. "There is one further matter," he said. "The charity requires a matron. It has never had one. The 4 inmates have kept themselves, which is why one of them broke a hip in October and lay 11 hours. 12 beds want a matron who can keep a ledger, order coal, and read a bill. I propose Miss Hesper Lane at £60 the year, with the matron's house adjoining, the appointment to be for 7 years certain, and not in the gift of any trustee alone, not mine, not any man's, so that she may be dismissed only by a vote of the whole board with cause stated in writing." Alderman Gubbins, who had nothing left to lose, said, "Your Grace has an interest." "I have," said the Duke. "I have a very great interest, and I am going to state it now in front of you all, because if I do not state it somebody else will state it worse." He turned to Hesper. "Miss Lane, from today you are not in my service. You will be the servant of this charity in your own house, on your own wages, dismissible only by 11 people. And on the day that is entered in the minute, I shall have the right to call on you as one private person calls on another, and you will have the right to send me away from your own door, which you have not had since the 29th of November. I have wanted you to have it for some weeks." The vestry at Cawbury, which had heard a great deal that day, heard that in complete silence. Hesper Lane's hands were flat on the table. She did not look up for a moment. "I accept the appointment," she said, "at £60 in my own house on those terms." And then to the room, quite clearly, "And I shall want the coal delivered to my own door and counted by me, and I shall want the key." He did not call for 11 days. He had told himself a month, and Lady Ordish had told him a fortnight, and 11 days was as long as he lasted. On the 24th of January, he walked down the last 200 yards from the bell to the matron's house at Cawbury Almshouse, in a thaw, with mud to the ankle and no carriage at all, and knocked at a green door with his own hand. She opened it in an apron with flour on her wrists and a coal tally in her fist, and behind her, through the passage, he could hear a great deal of talking. 8 new inmates in a fortnight, and a stove going, and somebody laughing. "Your Grace." "Miss Lane, may I come in?" "The parlor is full of a bed frame." "The step will do," said the Duke of Marchbourne, and sat down on it, which meant that a duke was sitting on a stone step in Cawbury in the mud in January, and that within half an hour the whole town would know it, and that he had chosen it deliberately. She sat down beside him, at a proper distance, with the tally still in her hand. "You have something to say," she said. "I have. It is not well arranged. I have been arranging it for 11 days, and it is worse now than it was on the first." He turned his hat over. "On the 29th of November you stood in a doorway in the rain and said 7 words, and I have not put them down since. I do not mean that I pitied you. I want to be exact, because you are exact. I mean that you had 11 shillings and no character and no roof, and you would not take a lie for a kindness. And you told 11 men to their faces that you would rather be refused honestly than by a wicked. I have sat at tables with the whole peerage of this country, and I have never once heard anything said that I respected as much." "Your Grace." "Elias," he said, "if you please, once." She was silent. "I have watched you for 2 months," he went on, "and I have taken pains that we should never be alone in a shut room, and I want you to know why, since it must have looked absurd. It was not for the town. It was because you could not have said no to me. You slept under my roof and ate my bread, and any question I asked you in a shut room would have been a question with a threat inside it whether I meant one or not. He looked at the mud. So I gave the answer to somebody else. 11 trustees, a 7-year appointment, £60, and a door you may shut in my face. It is done, and it cannot be undone by me. And now I am asking from the step with nothing in my hand at all, Miss Lane, will you marry me?" The thaw dripped off the almshouse eaves. Somewhere inside, an old woman said something about the stove, and somebody else laughed again. "They will say," Hesper said at last, "that I got at you through a charity ledger. They will. They will say it for 30 years. They will say it for rather less than that, in my experience, because people grow bored, and because my aunt intends to be extremely rude to anybody who tries." He turned his head. "Hesper, I am not asking you to endure it for my sake. I am asking whether you would rather endure it with me than without me. If the answer is without, I shall get up off this step, and I shall still see the coal delivered, and I shall never say another word of it, and you will not lose 1 shilling or 1 hour of your appointment. You have my word, and you have Mrs. Ryle to hold me to it, and she would." Hesper Lane put the coal tally down on the step between them. Then she put her hand over his the first time in 2 months that either of them had touched the other at all, and it was a hand with flour on the wrist and ink under the nail, and the Duke of Marchbourne stopped breathing for a moment like a boy. "Elias," she said, "yes." They were married at Cawbury Church on the 14th of April, and the whole difficulty of the day was seating. 12 almshouse inmates insisted on attending, and 4 of them could not walk, and the Duke's own carriage went up and down the street 6 times fetching them, which struck a good many people as unsuitable, and struck the Duke as the best use his grandfather's coachwork had ever been put to. Lady Ordish wore the sable. Mrs. Peveril, who was no longer a trustee, and had asked to be allowed to help anyway, spent the morning pinning lace onto a plain ivory gown and cried at the vestry door where it had all begun. Mr. Bartle sent the cake and would not be paid for it. The bride walked up the aisle past the tablet her husband had caused to be set in the north wall in February. It gave the 5th clause of the deed of 1749 in full, the aged, the sick, and the destitute, without distinction of settlement, and beneath it, in smaller letters, the names of the 21 who had been refused, and the 4 who had died, so that no clerk in any future century could quietly write them out again. Afterwards, when they were very old, The Duchess of Marchbourne used to say that the whole of her life had turned on a door being open after 5 o'clock. And her husband, who had learned in 40 years of marriage exactly when to be contradicted and exactly when not, would put down whatever he was reading and say, "It was not the door. You had walked past 3 lit windows to get to it, and every one of them would have taken you in for a shilling, and you chose the one place in Cawberry where you could be refused to your face by people who ought to have known better. That was not luck, my love. That was you." And she would say that he made a great deal of very little, and he would say that he had made a life of it, and the fire would be built up, and outside, on the 6 mile bound, 12 chimneys that had once been cold would be going in the dark.